The billionaire gave up on love. Until he met a waitress carrying his brother's baby. Death had a way of exposing truths that money couldn't buy. Dominic Hale stood in the marble foyer of his Boston penthouse, staring at a manila envelope that had arrived with his brother's personal effects. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, heavier than the stock portfolios, heavier than the luxury car keys, heavier than everything else Jasper had left behind. The 40-year-old pharmaceutical mogul had built his empire on precision. Every decision calculated, every emotion controlled, every relationship measured by its return on investment. That's how he'd survived the last 15 years. That's how he'd protected himself since the day his mother died and his heart learned to speak only in numbers. But this envelope didn't make sense in his perfectly ordered world. Lena Matthews, 847 Oakwood Street, apartment 3B. Please, she's carrying my baby. Jasper's handwriting was rushed, desperate. Nothing like the careless signature on million-dollar trust fund withdrawals. Dominic turned the note over, searching for more information, but found only a phone number and a coffee-stained business card from something called the Corner Grind Cafe. His phone buzzed. Another board meeting, another acquisition, another day of being the man everyone needed but no one really knew. Instead, Dominic found himself walking to his private garage, past the Bentley, past the Tesla, stopping at the one car Jasper had always mocked. A simple black sedan that could blend into any neighborhood without drawing attention. The drive to Oakwood Street took him through parts of Boston he hadn't seen in years. Chain restaurants replaced his usual five-star dining spots. Apartment complexes stood where he expected office towers. Real people walked these sidewalks. People with grocery bags and tired faces and problems that couldn't be solved with a wire transfer. 847 Oakwood Street was a modest 3-story building with chipped paint and a front door that had seen better decades. The kind of place where rent was paid weekly and dreams were measured in small victories. Dominic climbed the narrow stairs, his Italian leather shoes echoing against worn carpet. At apartment 3B, he paused. Through the thin door, he could hear the faint sound of a television and something else. Humming. A woman's voice, soft and melancholy, humming a tune he didn't recognize. He knocked twice. The humming stopped. Footsteps approached slowly, deliberately. A chain rattled. A lock clicked. The door opened 6 inches, revealing green eyes that seemed to see right through his expensive suit to something raw underneath. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or styling, the kind of natural beauty that existed in coffee shops and grocery store lines, unaware of its own power. If you're here about the noise complaints, Mrs. Henderson from 2A needs to mind her own business, the woman said, then stopped. Her eyes traveled from his face to his clothing, recognition dawning like a storm cloud. Wait, you're not the landlord. Are you Lena Matthews? Her hand moved instinctively to her rounded belly, 7 months pregnant, just as Jasper's note had indicated. The gesture was protective, maternal, fierce. Who's asking? My name is Dominic Hale. I think we need to talk about my brother. The color drained from her face. For a moment he thought she might slam the door. Instead, she opened it wider, her chin lifting with a defiance that surprised him. Jasper's dead, she said, the words carrying no emotion, just fact. I saw it on the news 3 days ago, so whatever game he was playing, whatever lie he told you about me, he didn't lie. Lena's green eyes blazed. Your brother was very good at making promises he never intended to keep, so forgive me if I don't trust the family genes. The baby moved. Dominic could see it even through her loose sweater. A tiny life that would grow up never knowing the man who created him, just like Dominic had grown up never really knowing his father. And in that moment, Dominic realized this wasn't about obligation anymore. Some conversations require neutral ground and strong coffee. Lena stared at the man standing in her doorway like he was a problem she couldn't solve. Dominic Hale looked exactly like what he was. Expensive, untouchable, and completely out of place in her world of second-hand furniture and unpaid bills. I don't want your money, she said before he could speak. I don't want your guilt. And I definitely don't want your pity. Good, Dominic replied, his voice surprisingly calm. Because I'm not offering any of those things. She studied his face, searching for the charm that had made Jasper so dangerous. Instead, she found something else. A weariness that expensive suits couldn't hide. Then what do you want? To understand. 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other at the Corner Grind Cafe, the same place where Jasper had first approached her 8 months ago. Lena's manager, Bridget, kept shooting curious glances from behind the espresso machine. It wasn't every day someone in a $1,000 suit walked into their little neighborhood spot. Lena wrapped her hands around a mug of herbal tea, grateful for something to do with her nervous energy. Dominic had ordered black coffee and hadn't touched it. He came in here every Tuesday for 3 weeks, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Always ordered the same thing, medium cappuccino extra foam. Always left a $20 tip on a $4 drink. That sounds like Jasper. I thought he was just being nice. You know, rich guy spreading the wealth. She paused, watching steam rise from her tea. I was so stupid. You weren't stupid for believing someone. Lena looked up sharply. Don't do that. Don't make excuses for him. Or for me. Dominic leaned back in his chair, studying her with those same intense eyes that had unnerved her at the door. Tell me what happened. The words came slowly at first, then faster, like a dam finally breaking. She told him about Jasper's charm, his promises of trips they'd never take, his talk of introducing her to his family. She told him about the night she'd worked up the courage to tell him about the pregnancy, and how he'd stared at her like she'd just announced she had a terminal illness. He said he needed time to think, Lena continued, her voice growing steadier with each word. That was 4 months ago. The last text I got from him was 3 days before he died. Can't do this. Sorry. How 5 words to end everything. Dominic's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. For what? You didn't get me pregnant and disappear. No, but I knew who my brother was. I should have what? Controlled his life? Fixed his mistakes? Lena shook her head. I've spent 4 months thinking about all the should-haves. It doesn't change anything. A young mother at a nearby table was struggling to keep her toddler entertained while juggling a phone call and a crying baby. Lena watched them with a mixture of sympathy and dread. In 2 months, that would be her, except she'd be doing it completely alone. What's your plan? Dominic asked, following her gaze. My plan? For after the baby comes? For work? For childcare? For surviving? Lena's laugh held no humor. I've got some money saved. Enough for maybe 2 months if I'm careful. Bridget says I can bring the baby to work sometimes, but that's not exactly a long-term solution. What about family? My parents died in a car accident when I was 19. No siblings, no fairy godmothers. She met his eyes directly. Just me. The baby chose that moment to kick, hard enough that Lena winced and placed a protective hand over her stomach. Without thinking, Dominic started to reach across the table, then stopped himself. Is he always that active? He? Lena raised an eyebrow. What makes you think it's a boy? I don't know. Instinct, maybe. For the first time since he'd appeared at her door, Lena almost smiled. Well, your instinct is right. It is a boy. Something shifted in Dominic's expression. So subtle she almost missed it. Pain, maybe. Or longing. It was gone before she could be sure. Have you thought about names? A few. She hesitated, then decided honesty couldn't make things any worse. I was going to name him Leo. It means brave. Leo, Dominic repeated, as if testing how it sounded. I like it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the afternoon crowd filter in and out of the cafe. Construction workers grabbing quick lunches, students typing on laptops, elderly couples sharing pastries. Real life happening around them, while they navigated something neither of them fully understood. Why are you really here? Lena asked finally. Dominic considered the question longer than she expected. I spent 15 years avoiding anything that felt complicated. Anything that couldn't be controlled or predicted or solved with money. And now? He looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing something he hadn't noticed before. Now I'm sitting in a coffee shop with a pregnant woman who refuses my help. And for the first time in years, I don't want to leave. The most dangerous help is the kind you don't see coming. Lena noticed the changes slowly, like morning light creeping through blinds she thought were closed tight. First, it was the prenatal vitamins. She'd been rationing them, taking one every other day to make the bottle last longer. When she opened the medicine cabinet 3 days after meeting Dominic, she found a new bottle, the expensive kind from the pharmacy across town, not the generic brand from the corner drugstore. Her landlord, Mr. Petrosky, claimed he'd received an anonymous payment covering her rent for the next 2 months. The heating bill that had been keeping her awake at night suddenly showed a zero balance. Her car, a 15-year-old Honda with a temperamental engine, was running smoother than it had in years. Bridget, Lena said during her morning shift, wiping down tables with more force than necessary. Did anyone come by asking about me? Her manager, a 50-something woman with graying hair and sharp instincts, Didn't look up from counting register receipts. Depends on what you mean by anyone. You know exactly what I mean. Tall guy? Expensive watch? Looks like he could buy this whole block without checking his bank balance? Lena's grip tightened on the dish rag. What did he want? Asked if you were doing okay, if you needed anything. Real casual-like. Bridget finally looked up, her expression knowing. Also left enough money to cover your health insurance co-pays for the rest of the year. Called it a community donation. He what? Honey, I've been running this place for 12 years. I know the difference between charity and guilt. That man's carrying some serious weight. Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks. Anger mixed with something else she couldn't name. Did you tell him anything? Told him you're the hardest worker I've ever had and that you've got more pride than sense. Bridget smiled. Also told him if he hurt you, I'd personally make sure he regretted it. That evening, Lena stood outside Dominic's office building in downtown Boston. The Hale Pharmaceuticals tower stretched 42 floors into the gray October sky, all glass and steel and intimidation. She'd never felt smaller than she did walking through those revolving doors. Her second-hand coat dripping rain onto marble floors that probably cost more than she made in a year. The security guard looked her up and down like she might be planning to steal something. Can I help you? I need to see Dominic Hale. Do you have an appointment? No, but then I'm afraid Mr. Hale isn't available. If you'd like to leave a message, tell him Lena Matthews is here. Tell him it's about Leo. 5 minutes later, she was riding an elevator to the 38th floor. Her reflection multiplied in polished surfaces that made her feel like she was falling upward. Dominic's office was exactly what she'd expected. Huge windows overlooking the harbor, furniture that belonged in museums, and a desk the size of her kitchen table. He stood when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. Lena, this is unexpected. Stop. She didn't wait for an invitation to sit. Stop helping me. Stop paying my bills. Stop fixing my life without asking. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. She pulled the prenatal vitamin bottle from her purse and set it on his desk with a sharp click. I can't afford these. I've never been able to afford these. But somehow they appeared in my apartment. Dominic moved to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. In the fading daylight, he looked older, more tired than she'd noticed before. You're pregnant with my nephew. Your health affects his health. That's not your decision to make, isn't it? He turned to face her. Jasper's gone. That baby is the only family I have left. He's not your family. The words came out sharper than she intended. He's mine. I'm the one who's going to raise him, feed him, worry about him at 3 a.m. You can't just buy your way into being important to him. You're right. The simple acknowledgement caught her off guard. She'd come prepared for an argument, not agreement. I am? You're absolutely right. I can't buy my way into anything real. He moved closer, his voice dropping to something that felt almost like a confession. But I can't walk away either. Why not? You don't owe me anything. You don't owe him anything. Dominic was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words were barely above a whisper. Because 16 years ago, I walked away from everything that mattered. I chose safety over love, control over connection. I told myself it was smart, that it was protecting me from getting hurt again. He met her eyes directly, and I've been regretting it every single day since. Some wounds take decades to heal, and sometimes they never do. The silence in Dominic's office stretched between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Lena stood frozen, watching this powerful man she'd thought she understood crumble just enough to show her something real. 16 years, she repeated, her voice softer now. What happened 16 years ago? Dominic walked back to his desk but didn't sit. Instead, he picked up a small silver frame she hadn't noticed before. The only personal item in the entire sterile office. Her name was Isabella. He handed Lena the photograph. We were engaged. The woman in the picture was beautiful in the way that only young love could capture. Dark hair, laughing eyes, her arms wrapped around a younger version of Dominic, who actually looked happy. Genuinely, completely happy. She was a teacher at an inner-city school in Cambridge. Said she wanted to change the world one kid at a time. Dominic's voice carried the weight of old grief. I was 24, fresh out of business school, convinced I could have everything I wanted if I just worked hard enough. What happened to her? Cancer, ovarian, stage 4 by the time they caught it. He took the frame back, his fingers tracing the glass. She fought for 18 months. I was with her for every chemo session, every doctor's appointment, every sleepless night in hospital chairs that weren't made for sleeping. Lena sank into the chair across from his desk, suddenly understanding why this man seemed to carry the world on his shoulders. She died on a Tuesday morning in March. I was holding her hand. Dominic set the frame down carefully, and I made a promise to myself that I would never feel that helpless again. So you shut everyone out. I built walls, bought companies instead of making friends, dated women who wanted my money, not my heart. He finally sat down, looking older than his 40 years. It was easier, safer, and lonelier. Yes, the admission came without hesitation. Much lonelier. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Boston's evening traffic crawled through the streets like tiny lights in the darkness. Lena watched the city move while processing everything Dominic had just shared. Why are you telling me this? Because when I found Jasper's note about you, about the baby, I saw an opportunity to do something right for once, to be the kind of man Isabella thought I could be. By paying my bills behind my back? By making sure you don't have to choose between prenatal vitamins and groceries? By making sure that little boy has every advantage, even if his father— Dominic's voice trailed off. Even if his father was a coward, Lena finished. You can say it. I've said it plenty of times. Jasper wasn't evil. He was just young, scared. He never had to face real consequences for anything. And you did. I learned that love costs everything and guarantees nothing. Dominic met her eyes. But walking away from it costs even more. Lena felt Leo move inside her. A gentle rolling motion that reminded her why she was here, why any of this mattered. I can't be your second chance, Dominic. I can't be the person who fixes 16 years of regret. I'm not asking you to be. Then what are you asking? He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his words were careful, measured. Let me drive you to your next doctor's appointment. The request was so simple, so unexpected, that Lena almost laughed. That's it? That's it. No money. No bills, no fixing things you don't want fixed. Just let me be there. Why? Because in 3 weeks, you'll hear that baby's heartbeat. You'll see him on the ultrasound screen, and for 5 minutes you'll get to see the miracle of who he's becoming. Dominic's voice grew quieter. I missed that with Isabella. We never got the chance to make something together, to create something that would outlast us both. Lena pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the steady rhythm of the life growing inside her. Leo, her brave little boy who was already teaching her about courage she didn't know she had. One appointment, she said finally. One appointment. And if you try to pay for anything, you'll personally make sure I regret it. Bridget already gave me that warning. For the first time since walking into his office, Lena smiled. A real smile, small but genuine. One appointment, Mr. Hale, but I'm driving. Some moments change everything, and you never see them coming. The waiting room at Boston Women's Health Center smelled like disinfectant and hope. Lena sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands folded over her 8-month belly, watching other expectant mothers flip through parenting magazines with their partners beside them. Dominic had arrived exactly on time, carrying 2 coffee cups, and looking like he'd rather face a hostile board meeting than sit in a room full of pregnant women. He'd handed her herbal tea without being asked. He'd remembered her preference from the cafe. You know you don't have to come in with me, Lena said for the 3rd time. You can wait out here. Do you want me to wait out here? The question caught her off guard. Most people told her what they thought was best. Dominic actually asked what she wanted. I don't know, she admitted. I've been doing this alone for so long, I'm not sure what having someone there would feel like. Lena Matthews? A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Lena's heart rate spiked the way it always did before appointments. 8 months of pregnancy had taught her that doctors' visits could bring wonderful news or devastating surprises, and there was no way to predict which one you'd get. She stood up, then looked back at Dominic. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Nervous, maybe, or hopeful. Come on, she said quietly. Let's go meet your nephew. Dr. Ramona Wells had been Lena's obstetrician since her 2nd month of pregnancy. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands, she'd guided Lena through every milestone without judgment or pity. How are we feeling today? Dr. Wells asked as Lena settled onto the examination table. Big, tired, ready to meet this little guy. And you brought a friend today? Dr. Wells smiled at Dominic, who was standing awkwardly near the door like he wasn't sure he belonged there. This is Dominic. He's family. The word felt strange in her mouth, but not wrong. Whatever was happening between them, it was becoming something that resembled family. Chosen rather than born, complicated rather than simple. Well, Dominic, You're about to see something pretty amazing. Dr. Wells squeezed gel onto Lena's belly and picked up the ultrasound wand. Let's see how baby Leo is doing. The monitor crackled to life, showing the familiar black and white swirls that would soon resolve into her son. Lena had seen this view dozens of times, but today felt different. Today someone else was holding their breath beside her. There he is, Dr. Wells said, adjusting the wand. Look at that profile. And there was Leo, no longer the vague blob from early ultrasounds, but a fully formed baby with Jasper's nose and what looked like her stubborn chin. His tiny fist was pressed against his cheek, and his legs were folded up like he was getting comfortable for a long nap. Lena heard a sharp intake of breath and realized it had come from Dominic. He's real, he whispered, moving closer to the screen without seeming to realize he was doing it. Very real, and very healthy. Dr. Wells clicked a few buttons, taking measurements. Heart rate is perfect. Growth is right on track. He's probably going to be a big baby, maybe 8.5 pounds. Like his uncle, Lena said, glancing at Dominic. I bet you were a big baby too. 9 pounds, 3 ounces. My mother never let me forget it. The easy conversation surprised all of them. For a moment, they weren't a billionaire and a single mother navigating an impossible situation. They were just two people marveling at the miracle happening on a small screen. Would you like to hear the heartbeat? Dr. Wells asked. Lena nodded, and suddenly the room filled with the rapid, steady rhythm of Leo's heart. It sounded like a tiny drum, fast and strong and determined, the sound of life insisting on itself despite everything. Dominic went completely still. His eyes were fixed on the monitor, but Lena could see his hands trembling slightly at his sides. That's him, she said softly. That's our brave little boy. When she said our, she didn't mean to. The word just slipped out, natural as breathing. But Dominic heard it, and something shifted in his expression. Wonder replacing caution, possibility replacing fear. Can I? He hesitated, then gestured toward her belly. Could I? Lena understood without him finishing the question. She took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach, right where Leo was moving. The baby kicked, hard, as if he knew someone new was there. Dominic's eyes went wide. He's strong. He's going to have to be. They stayed like that for several heartbeats, his large hand covering the spot where their future was literally growing, both of them listening to the sound of hope beating 140 times per minute. Dr. Wells finished the examination and printed several pictures, handing them to Lena with a knowing smile. Everything looks perfect. I'll see you next week for your final monthly appointment. In the parking lot, Dominic was unusually quiet. He walked Lena to her car, his hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. Thank you, he said finally, for letting me be there. Thank you for wanting to be there. He handed her one of the ultrasound pictures she'd given him. Would you mind if I kept this? Lena looked at the image. Leo's profile captured in black and white, proof that sometimes the most important things were invisible until someone taught you how to see them. Keep it, she said. He should know someone was there from the beginning. The most profound transformations happen in grocery store aisles and quiet moments. 3 weeks after the ultrasound appointment, Dominic found himself doing something he hadn't done in 15 years, grocery shopping like a normal person. He stood in the baby aisle of the downtown Boston Market Basket, staring at an overwhelming wall of diapers, formula, and tiny clothes that looked impossibly small. The ultrasound picture of Leo was tucked in his wallet, creased from being looked at too many times. First baby? Dominic turned to find an elderly woman with silver hair and knowing eyes, her cart filled with what looked like supplies for an army of grandchildren. My nephew, he said, the word feeling more natural each time he used it. Ah, she smiled and picked up a package of newborn diapers. Trust me, honey, you'll go through more of these than you think possible. And get the sensitive kind. Babies have delicate skin. Before he could object that he wasn't actually shopping for supplies, she was loading his cart with practical necessities, diapers in multiple sizes, gentle baby wash, soft receiving blankets in neutral colors. The mama doing okay? She's strong, stubborn, independent to a fault. The woman laughed. In other words, she's perfect for raising a baby. Those are exactly the qualities you need. She patted his arm. You're a good uncle for thinking ahead. Driving to Lena's apartment later that evening, Dominic questioned every item in his trunk. She'd been clear about not wanting his help, but the baby supplies felt different somehow, less like charity and more like preparation for something inevitable. He knocked on her door at 6:30, holding only a bag of Thai food from the restaurant near his office. "I brought dinner," he said when she opened the door. "No strings attached." Lena looked exhausted. Her usual neat ponytail was messy. There were dark circles under her green eyes, and she was wearing an oversized sweater that had seen better days. "I'm not really hungry," she said, but stepped aside to let him in. "When was the last time you ate?" "I had a granola bar around noon." "Lena." There was gentle reproach in his voice. "You're 36 weeks pregnant. You need real food." "I know what I need." But even as she said it, her stomach betrayed her with a loud rumble. Dominic unpacked the food without comment. Pad Thai with extra vegetables, spring rolls, coconut soup that smelled like comfort. He'd remembered she preferred mild spices from their conversation at the cafe weeks ago. They ate in companionable silence at her small kitchen table, the only sounds coming from the ancient radiator and the distant hum of traffic outside. Lena's apartment was tiny but clean, decorated with yard sale finds and handmade touches that spoke of someone who could create warmth from very little. "There's something I need to tell you," Lena said finally, setting down her fork. Dominic's chest tightened. "What is it?" "I got laid off today." The words hit him like physical blows. "What happened?" "Budget cuts. Last hired, first fired." She shrugged, but he could see the fear she was trying to hide. "Bridget fought for me, but the cafe's struggling. They can't afford to keep someone who'll need maternity leave in 2 weeks. How are you going to—" "I'll figure it out. I always do." But her voice cracked slightly on the last word, and Dominic saw through the brave front to the terrified young woman underneath. She was 36 weeks pregnant, alone, and now unemployed. "Let me help. We've been through this." "No, we've been through you refusing charity. This isn't charity." He leaned forward. "Let me hire you." "As what? Your personal pregnant lady in distress?" "As a consultant. I'm expanding the pharmaceutical company into community health initiatives. I need someone who understands what real families face, what real healthcare challenges look like." It wasn't entirely a lie. He had been considering such expansion. Someone who's lived it, not just studied it in business school. Lena stared at him. "You're making that up." "I'm not. Well, not entirely." He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "But the position could exist, should exist. And what would this fictional job pay? Enough to cover your expenses until you decide what you really want to do after Leo's born." She was quiet for so long he thought she might kick him out. Instead, she did something that surprised them both. She started to cry. Not the angry tears he'd expected, but quiet tears of relief and exhaustion and fear finally acknowledged. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared I'm going to mess this up, that I'm not strong enough or smart enough or good enough to be his mother." Without thinking, Dominic moved around the table and knelt beside her chair. "Lena, look at me." She turned her tear-stained face toward him. "You are going to be an amazing mother. Leo is the luckiest baby in the world because he gets you. Your strength, your independence, your fierce protective instincts." His voice was steady, certain, "and he's not going to be alone. Neither are you. Promise?" The word was so small, so vulnerable, that it broke something open in Dominic's chest. This woman who demanded nothing from him was asking for the one thing he could actually give, his word. "I promise." Later, after helping her wash dishes and making sure she had everything she needed for the night, Dominic quietly carried the baby supplies from his car to her doorstep. He didn't knock again, just left them there with a simple note. For Leo. From someone who's already planning to love him. As he drove home through the quiet Boston streets, Dominic realized that somewhere between grocery shopping and wiping away her tears, everything had changed. He wasn't just helping Jasper's ex-girlfriend anymore. He was building a family. Some nights change the trajectory of everything that comes after. At 2:47 a.m., Dominic's phone rang with the kind of urgency that meant something was wrong. He'd been awake anyway, standing in his penthouse kitchen with a cup of coffee he didn't want, staring out at the Boston skyline and thinking about Lena's tears from the night before. Sleep had become elusive since Leo became real to him, since he started caring about someone else's future more than his own comfort. "Dominic?" Lena's voice was tight with pain and barely controlled panic. I think something's happening." He was dressed and in his car within 3 minutes. The drive to Oakwood Street normally took 25 minutes in traffic. At 3 in the morning, with empty streets and fear as his co-pilot, Dominic made it in 12. He found Lena sitting on her front steps in pajamas and a winter coat, her face pale in the streetlight. The pain started around midnight, she said as he helped her to the car. They're getting closer together, and there's been some bleeding. Dominic's hands were steady as he buckled her seatbelt, but his voice betrayed his worry. How close together? Every 6 minutes now. She gripped the door handle as another contraction hit. It's too early. He's not supposed to come for another 3 weeks. Hey, he covered her hand with his. Look at me. Leo is going to be fine. You're going to be fine. We're 5 minutes from Mass General. The emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights and urgent voices. Dominic stayed close as nurses wheeled Lena into a room, his hand never leaving her shoulder. When a young resident tried to send him to the waiting room, family only, Lena's voice cut through the medical chatter with surprising strength. He is family. Dr. Wells arrived 40 minutes later, her hair slightly mussed but her competence intact. After examining Lena, she delivered the news with professional calm that somehow made it scarier. You're in preterm labor, but the baby's heart rate is strong. We're going to try to slow things down with medication, but if Leo decides he's ready to meet the world tonight, we'll be prepared. Is he going to be okay? Lena's question was barely a whisper. Babies born at 37 weeks do very well. He's fully developed, just a little eager. Dr. Wells smiled. The next few hours will tell us what he's decided. Those next few hours passed like weeks. Dominic had never felt more helpless than he did watching Lena labor through contractions that the medication couldn't quite stop. She was exhausted, scared, and trying to be braver than anyone should have to be alone. Except she wasn't alone. Tell me about Isabella, Lena said during a brief lull between pains, her voice hoarse from hours of controlled breathing. What about her? What would she think of this? Of you being here? Dominic considered the question seriously. She'd probably say I was being an idiot for taking so long to figure out what mattered. And what matters? This. He gestured to the small room, to her hand in his, to the monitor showing Leo's steady heartbeat. Being here when someone needs you, not running away when things get complicated. Another contraction gripped her stronger than the others. Lena squeezed his hand so hard he thought she might break his fingers, but he didn't pull away. I can't do this, she gasped when it passed. I'm not ready. I don't know how to be a mother. You've been protecting him for 8 months. You've been making decisions for his health, his future, his safety. You're already his mother, Lena. You have been since the day you decided to keep him. At 6:23 a.m., Dr. Wells made the decision that changed everything. We're going to have a baby today, she announced. Leo's decided he's done waiting. The next 2 hours were a whirlwind of organized chaos. Dominic had planned to wait outside, had assumed he'd be asked to leave when things got serious. Instead, Lena kept his hand in a death grip and refused to let go. Don't leave, she said between pushes. Please don't leave. I'm not going anywhere. And he wasn't. When Leo Matthews Hale entered the world at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November, 6 pounds, 2 ounces of furious, healthy baby, Dominic was the second person to hold him. The baby was tiny, red-faced, and perfect. He had Jasper's dark hair and what looked like Lena's stubborn chin, and when he opened his eyes for the first time, they were the clearest blue Dominic had ever seen. Hello, Leo, Dominic whispered, supporting the baby's tiny head with hands that shook slightly. I'm your Uncle Dom. Leo yawned, as if being born was exhausting work and he needed a nap. Lena, propped up on pillows and looking like she'd just accomplished the impossible, watched Dominic with their son. There was something in her expression that hadn't been there before. Trust, maybe, or recognition of something that had been building between them for weeks. He looks like you, she said softly. He looks like himself. Dominic carefully transferred the baby back to her arms. He looks perfect. As the morning sun streamed through the hospital room windows, painting everything in golden light, Dominic realized he was looking at his future. Not the one he'd planned, not the one he'd built walls to protect, but the one that had found him anyway. A future that started with a phone call at 2:47 a.m., and a woman brave enough to ask him not to leave. The hardest truths surface in the quiet hours when defenses are down. 2 weeks after Leo's birth, Dominic discovered that newborns operated on a schedule that had nothing to do with business hours or logical planning. He'd been staying in Lena's spare room, barely larger than a closet, since they'd brought Leo home from the hospital. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just until Lena got back on her feet. But temporary had a way of feeling permanent when you were measuring time and feeding schedules and diaper changes. At 3:17 a.m., Leo's cries cut through the apartment like a tiny alarm system that couldn't be silenced. Dominic heard Lena's footsteps in the hallway, heard her soft voice trying to soothe their son, heard the exhaustion she thought she was hiding. She'd been trying to do everything herself, feeding Leo every 2 hours, changing diapers, managing the constant laundry that came with a newborn. When Dominic offered to help, she'd smile and insist she was fine. But fine was a 4-letter word that meant she was drowning and too proud to ask for a life preserver. After 20 minutes of Leo's increasingly frustrated cries, Dominic knocked softly on her bedroom door. "Need backup?" "I've got it," came Lena's voice, strained with the particular exhaustion that belonged to new mothers everywhere. "Lena, let me help." The door opened to reveal Lena in rumpled pajamas, her hair escaping from a messy bun, tears of frustration threatening to spill over. Leo was red-faced and furious in her arms, his tiny fists waving in protest at whatever had disturbed his sleep. "He won't stop crying," she said, her voice breaking. "I've fed him, changed him, checked his temperature. I don't know what else to do." Dominic stepped into the room and gently took Leo from her arms. The baby's cries immediately softened to hiccuping protests. "Sometimes they just need to be held by someone who isn't worried," he said, settling Leo against his chest. "You're exhausted. Your stress is his stress. I should know what to do. I'm his mother. You've been his mother for exactly 14 days. Cut yourself some slack." Leo's breathing began to even out as Dominic swayed gently, one large hand supporting the baby's back. In the dim light from the hallway, Lena watched this powerful man she was still learning to trust turn into someone soft and patient. "Where did you learn to do that?" "I didn't. I'm making it up as I go." He looked down at Leo's sleepy face. "Same as you." Lena sank onto the edge of her bed, suddenly looking younger than her 28 years. "I keep waiting for someone to realize I have no idea what I'm doing and take him away. That's not going to happen." "How do you know?" "Because you're terrified of messing up. Bad mothers don't worry about being bad mothers." Dominic settled into the rocking chair Lena had found at a thrift store, Leo now sleeping peacefully against his shoulder. Good mothers lose sleep wondering if they're doing enough. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Leo sleep with the intensity that all new parents brought to the simple act of breathing. The apartment was quiet except for the radiator's gentle hiss and the distant hum of the city that never quite slept. "Dominic?" Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. "Yeah? What are we doing?" The question hung between them like something fragile that might shatter if handled wrong. Dominic had been asking himself the same thing for weeks. What this was, what they were becoming, what happened when temporary arrangements started feeling like forever. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never done anything like this before." "Like what?" "Like caring about someone else's happiness more than my own comfort." Lena pulled her knees up to her chest, studying his face in the dim light. "Is that what this is?" "Maybe." He shifted Leo to his other arm, marveling at how natural the motion had become. "All I know is that 2 months ago I went to bed thinking about quarterly reports and merger possibilities. Now I go to bed wondering if Leo's getting enough to eat and whether you're happy." "Are you happy?" The question surprised him with its directness. "Are you?" "I asked first." Dominic considered the question seriously. Happy wasn't a word he'd used to describe himself in years. Content, maybe. Successful, certainly. But happy? "I think I'm learning how to be," he said finally. "Even living in a tiny apartment with a crying baby and a woman who doesn't know what she's doing. Especially then." Something shifted in Lena's expression. A wall coming down, a guard being lowered. "I lied earlier. When I said I didn't know what else to do with Leo." "What do you mean?" "I knew if I called for you, you'd come. I knew you'd help. But I wanted to prove I could handle it alone." She wrapped her arms around her knees. "I've been alone for so long, asking for help feels like admitting failure. Asking for help isn't failure, it's trust." "Is that what this is? Trust?" Dominic looked down at Leo, then back at Lena. "I think it's something more than that." "Like what?" The words were there, hovering just beyond his ability to say them out loud. Words that would change everything between them. Words that felt too big for 3 a.m. confessions in a room that smelled like baby powder and new beginnings. Instead, he said something that was equally true but safer. Like family. Lena smiled. The first real smile he'd seen from her in days. "Leo's lucky to have you. We're all lucky to have each other." As if he knew he was being discussed, Leo stirred in Dominic's arms, his tiny mouth making the sucking motion that meant he'd be hungry again soon. But for now, he was content to sleep between the two people who were learning to love him, and learning, perhaps, to love each other. Sometimes the past arrives uninvited, demanding answers you're not ready to give. The knock on Lena's apartment door came on a Tuesday morning, while Leo slept peacefully in his bassinet, and Dominic was in the kitchen making coffee. 3 weeks of domestic routine had given them all a false sense of security, as if the outside world had forgotten they existed. Lena opened the door to find a woman in her 60s with perfectly styled gray hair, designer clothing, and the kind of bearing that suggested she was accustomed to getting her way. Behind her stood a younger man in an expensive suit, holding a briefcase and looking uncomfortable. "Lena Matthews?" The woman's voice carried the crisp authority of Boston's old money families. "Yes. My name is Vivian Hale. I believe you're acquainted with my son." The coffee mug in Dominic's hand hit the kitchen floor with a sharp crack. Lena felt the blood drain from her face as she realized she was looking at Dominic's mother, the woman he'd described as cold, controlling, and convinced that emotional attachments were weaknesses to be eliminated. "Mrs. Hale." Lena's voice was steady despite the panic racing through her chest. "This is unexpected." "I imagine it is." Vivian stepped past Lena into the small apartment without invitation, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The baby supplies scattered around the living room, the evidence of someone making this place a home. "We need to discuss your situation." "Mother." Dominic appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully controlled but his voice carrying an edge Lena had never heard before. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning up another one of your messes, apparently." Vivian's gaze moved between her son and Lena with obvious disapproval. "Though I must say this one is more complicated than your usual charitable cases." The man with the briefcase cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should sit down and discuss this civilized—" "There's nothing to discuss," Lena interrupted, finding her voice. "I don't want anything from your family, I never did." "Oh my dear, this isn't about what you want." Vivian's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "This is about what's best for everyone involved." Leo chose that moment to wake up, his soft cries immediately drawing Dominic's attention. Without thinking, he moved toward the bassinet, but Vivian's voice stopped him cold. "Don't." The single word carried decades of maternal authority, and for a moment Dominic froze like the little boy he'd once been. "Don't what?" Lena's protective instincts flared. "Comfort his nephew? Take care of the baby he's been helping raise for 3 weeks? That child is not his nephew." Vivian's voice was ice. "Jasper is dead. Whatever responsibilities you think that creates died with him. Leo is Jasper's son," Dominic said quietly, moving to pick up the baby despite his mother's disapproval. "That makes him family." "Family?" Vivian laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You're playing house with a gold digger and her bastard child." "This isn't family, Dominic. This is a midlife crisis." The silence that followed was deafening. Lena felt as if she'd been slapped, but it was the look on Dominic's face that broke her heart. Pain and shame and the particular anguish that came from having the people you loved most hurt each other. "Get out." The words came from Lena's mouth before she realized she was speaking. "Get out of my home." "Miss Matthews, if you'll just listen to reason," the lawyer began. "No." Lena stood straighter, channeling every ounce of strength she'd built over 28 years of taking care of herself. "I said get out. Both of you." "Lena." Vivian's voice took on a condescending tone. "I understand this is emotional for you, but we're trying to help. The Hale family is prepared to offer you a very generous settlement in exchange for your agreement to end this charade and allow Dominic to return to his real life." "His real life?" "A life befitting his position. Marriage to an appropriate woman from an appropriate family. Children who will actually carry his blood." Vivian's eyes flicked to Leo dismissively. "Not playing father to another man's mistake." Something inside Dominic snapped. Enough. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of 40 years of suppressed anger. "Leo is not a mistake. Lena is not a gold digger. And this," he gestured to the small apartment that had become more home to him than his penthouse ever was. "This is more real than anything I've had in 15 years. Dominic, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. For the first time in my adult life, I'm being completely reasonable." He stepped closer to his mother, Leo still cradled protectively in his arms. "I'm choosing love over fear. I'm choosing family over fortune. I'm choosing to stay instead of running away." Vivian's mask of composure finally cracked. "You're making a mistake, just like you did with that teacher girl who died." The mention of Isabella was the final straw. Lena watched Dominic's face transform, saw him become someone she'd never seen before. Not the controlled businessman or the gentleman who'd held her hand through labor, but someone willing to go to war for what mattered. Isabella was the best thing that ever happened to me, and losing her was the worst. His voice was deadly calm. But Lena and Leo aren't Isabella. They're not a replacement or a consolation prize. They're my future, the future I'm choosing. And if I disown you, cut you off completely? Dominic looked at Lena, then down at Leo, who had stopped crying and was staring up at him with those impossibly blue eyes. Then I guess I'll learn to live without your money. I've already learned to live without your love. Vivian Hale left without another word, her lawyer trailing behind her like an expensive shadow. The apartment felt different after they were gone, smaller somehow, but also safer. Lena sank onto the couch, her hands shaking with residual adrenaline. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to choose. Dominic sat beside her, still holding Leo. I didn't have to choose. I wanted to choose. But your inheritance, your company, can all be rebuilt. He turned to face her fully. But this? What we have here? This is irreplaceable. Outside, the November afternoon was turning cold. But inside the small apartment on Oakwood Street, 3 people who'd found each other against all odds were learning what it meant to be worth fighting for. And for the first time in his life, Dominic Hale knew exactly where he belonged. Love isn't about perfect timing. It's about being brave enough to choose it anyway. 3 days after Vivian Hale's devastating visit, Dominic stood in his empty penthouse surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of a life he was choosing to leave behind. His mother had made good on her threats. The trust fund was frozen, his position at Hale Pharmaceuticals revoked, and his access to the family fortune cut off completely. 15 years of building an empire had evaporated with a single phone call from the family lawyers. But as he packed the last of his personal belongings, Isabella's photograph, a few books, the ultrasound picture of Leo that he'd kept on his nightstand, Dominic felt something he hadn't experienced in years: freedom. His phone buzzed with another call from his assistant, another plea to reconsider, another reminder of what he was walking away from. He let it go to voicemail. Instead, he drove to Oakwood Street. He found Lena sitting on her front steps despite the December cold. Leo bundled in her arms, both of them looking like they were waiting for something, or someone. "Shouldn't you be inside?" he asked, sitting down beside her on the concrete steps that had become strangely familiar. Mrs. Henderson was vacuuming again. "Leo doesn't like loud noises." She glanced at him sideways. "Besides, I was hoping you'd come by." "Yeah? I saw the news report about your mother removing you from the company board." Dominic wasn't surprised the media had picked up the story. The Hale family drama was exactly the kind of scandal that Boston's financial newspapers loved to dissect. "Are you okay?" Lena's voice was soft, concerned. "I think I'm better than okay." He reached over to touch Leo's tiny hand, marveling at how something so small could have changed everything. "I think I'm finally awake." "Dominic." Lena hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. "I need to tell you something." The seriousness in her tone made him turn to face her fully. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about everything your mother said, about you sacrificing your real life for us." Her green eyes were bright with unshed tears. "And I think maybe she's right." "Lena." "No, listen. You deserve someone who can give you everything. Someone from your world. Someone who understands the life you're supposed to have." She looked down at Leo, who was sleeping peacefully despite the cold. "Not a broke single mother with more baggage than a person should carry. Are you breaking up with me?" The question came out before Dominic realized they'd never actually defined what they were to each other. "We were never together, remember? This was all supposed to be temporary. And what if I don't want it to be temporary?" Lena's breath caught. "What?" Dominic stood up, then knelt down in front of her on the concrete steps, not caring who might see or what they might think. This wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. This was about truth. "Lena Matthews, I am 40 years old, and I have spent the last 15 years of my life running away from anything that felt real. I convinced myself that safety was better than love, that control was better than connection." Leo stirred in her arms, as if he could sense the importance of what was happening. "But then I met a green-eyed waitress who refused my money and demanded my honesty instead. A woman who was brave enough to raise a baby alone, strong enough to call me on my bullshit, and generous enough to let me into her son's life even when she had every reason not to trust me." Tears were streaming down Lena's face now, but she didn't interrupt. "I love you," Dominic said, the words feeling both foreign and completely natural. "I love your stubbornness and your strength and the way you hum while you're washing dishes. I love watching you with Leo, seeing how gentle you can be and how fierce you become when you're protecting him." "Dominic." I love that you make me want to be better than I was. I love that you see the man I could be instead of the one I've been hiding behind. He reached up to wipe away her tears. And I love Leo like he's my own son because in every way that matters he is. You don't know what you're saying. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He took her free hand in both of his. Marry me. The words hung in the cold December air like something miraculous and terrifying. You're proposing to me on my front steps? I'm proposing to you wherever you'll let me. Front steps, coffee shops, hospital rooms. Anywhere you are is exactly where I want to be. Lena was quiet for so long that Dominic began to think he'd misread everything, that the connection he felt was one-sided, that love wasn't always enough. Then Leo opened his eyes and looked directly at Dominic, as if he was offering his own opinion on the matter. Yes, Lena whispered. Yes? Yes. I'll marry you. Yes, I love you too. Yes to all of it. She leaned forward until their foreheads touched. But I need you to understand something. Anything. I'm not just saying yes to you. I'm saying yes to us. To the family we've already started building, to the life we've been creating without realizing it. Her voice grew stronger. I'm saying yes to choosing love even when it's scary, even when it doesn't make sense on paper. Dominic kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promises neither of them had been brave enough to make before. Leo made a small sound between them, and they broke apart laughing. I think he approves, Lena said. I think he's been planning this longer than we have. As they sat on those concrete steps, two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of loss, who'd built love from grief and hope from fear, the December sun broke through the gray Boston clouds for the first time in days. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future felt like exactly where they belonged. The most beautiful love stories are written in ordinary moments. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of the small house in Cambridge, casting golden light across the breakfast table where Leo Matthews Hale was methodically destroying a piece of toast while his parents tried to have an adult conversation. Up! Up! The 2-year-old demanded, reaching sticky fingers toward Dominic, who was attempting to drink coffee and read emails simultaneously. In a minute, buddy, Dominic said, but he was already setting down his phone and lifting Leo onto his lap. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and saying no to this little boy had never been one of them. Lena watched from across the table, her wedding ring catching the light as she reached for her own coffee. 2 years of marriage had settled into a rhythm she never could have imagined, chaotic and peaceful, challenging and comforting, nothing like the fairy tales she'd stopped believing in long before she met Dominic. How's the new clinic coming along? She asked, referring to the community health center Dominic had opened in Roxbury 6 months ago. Better than expected. We're seeing about 200 patients a week now. He bounced Leo gently, earning a delighted giggle. The pharmaceutical consulting is paying the bills and the clinic is feeding my soul. It hadn't been easy, those first months after Vivian Hale had cut him off. Dominic had discovered that starting over at 40 required a different kind of courage than he'd needed at 25. But with Lena's practical wisdom and Leo's unwavering belief that his Uncle Dom could fix anything, he'd built something smaller, but infinitely more meaningful than the empire he'd lost. Mrs. Henderson wants to know if we're coming to her birthday party next week, Lena said, scrolling through her phone messages. Apparently Leo's the only 2-year-old she can tolerate. That's because he's charming like his mother. He's stubborn like his father. They'd had this conversation before, about Leo's parentage, about what to tell him when he was old enough to ask questions, about the biology that mattered less each day as love continued to build what blood had started. Dada, Leo said solemnly, patting Dominic's cheek with one jammy hand. The word still stopped Dominic's heart every time he heard it. That's right, little man. I'm your dad. The doorbell rang, interrupting the peaceful morning routine. Lena frowned. They weren't expecting anyone, and unexpected visitors had learned to approach the Matthews Hale household with caution after the legendary incident involving Leo, a garden hose, and a very surprised mail carrier. Dominic opened the door to find a woman in her 30s with familiar blue eyes and an uncertain smile. I'm sorry to bother you, she said. My name is Caroline Hale. I'm Dominic's cousin from California. I saw the news about the family situation, and I wanted to reach out. Behind her stood a man about the same age and 2 children who looked to be around 8 and 10. We're driving cross-country, Caroline continued, and we thought maybe it was time someone in the family met your son. Dominic stepped back, letting them into the hallway that was cluttered with Leo's toys and the general chaos of a household where a toddler ruled supreme. "Lena," he called. "We have company." The next hour was a whirlwind of introductions, coffee, and the particular kind of awkwardness that came with family reunions that involved explaining why certain other family members weren't speaking to each other. But Leo, with the universal diplomacy of toddlers everywhere, broke through the tension by offering his favorite stuffed elephant to Caroline's youngest daughter and insisting that everyone needed to see his impressive collection of toy trucks. "He's beautiful," Caroline said quietly to Dominic as they watched Leo show his new cousins how to make proper truck noises. "He looks happy. He is happy. They both are. And you?" Dominic considered the question, looking around the living room that bore no resemblance to his old penthouse but felt more like home than anywhere he'd ever lived. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Later that evening, after Caroline's family had continued their journey and Leo was finally asleep after the excitement of new playmates, Dominic and Lena sat on their front porch watching the neighborhood settle into nighttime quiet. "Do you ever regret it?" Lena asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "Giving up everything for this?" "I didn't give up everything," Dominic said, wrapping his arms around her. "I traded everything I thought I wanted for everything I actually needed. Even on the days when Leo decides the living room wall is his personal art gallery. Especially then." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the city and the gentle creaking of their porch swing, the same swing where Leo had taken his first steps 3 months ago, determined to reach his father who was sitting just out of reach with arms open wide. "I love you," Lena said quietly, the words as easy and natural as breathing after 2 years of marriage and a lifetime of learning to trust them. "I love you too." Dominic pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Both of you. All of us." Inside the house, Leo stirred in his crib, probably dreaming of toy trucks and birthday parties in the secure knowledge that he was loved beyond measure by 2 people who'd found each other in the space between grief and hope. And on a quiet street in Cambridge, in a house that was small but full of laughter, a family that had been built from courage and choice, and the radical